Hello, everyone. I've got a very special guest on the show today. Her name is Dr. Supatra Tovar. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be speaking to you today. And I know you've got a lot to knowledge and wisdom to share. So Supatra, please introduce yourself and what do you do?
I am a clinical psychologist as well as a registered dietitian and fitness expert. So those three designations are really important to me because I am very dedicated to practicing holistic health psychology, which basically involves looking at a person from more than just a mental health standpoint. I like to examine them, in terms of their physical health, their spiritual health, and their general well-being in order to treat them on a holistic level.
Wow. Yeah, that's super awesome. And I love the holistic side that you focus on. So we're going to get into a little bit more of that as we go through the conversation. But I'm really curious to start off with, where did this interest into your pursuit of these kind of studies and these areas, where did it all come from or start from?
Well, I grew up in Colorado, which is a very, just outdoorsy, athletic state. So I grew up, practicing many different kinds of sports, always being outside, just really kind of immersed into nature and health and wellness. So it really started there. And I'd always had a very keen interest in science. So that was like, my passion growing up is science, as well as the arts and other things. But what really got me interested in taking the path that I take is that a very, very close person to me in my teens developed an eating disorder. And that was really distressing to me. It was really foreign to me too, because I never really experienced any of that kind of, worry and fear about my weight and things like that, because I was always just running and outside and just not thinking about that kind of thing. So when my close friend developed this eating disorder, I felt really, really helpless and didn't know how to, help or assist or ask questions or do anything. And luckily, this person did get help and treatment and, eventually recovered from the eating disorder. But that inspired me, especially when I went on to my college studies. I was a pre-med biology student. And when I came out to Los Angeles, I, was starting to make my living as a Pilates instructor. So I started on the fitness side. And when I was, working with people on the fitness side, that's when I really saw the amount of eating disorders that are present in Los Angeles. It's such a image-based city. It's all about, the way you look and how much you weigh. And, it reminded me of what I saw in my teens. And, when you're a Pilates instructor, oftentimes you're kind of like a therapist anyway, especially if you're doing private sessions with people. So that's what really inspired me to take my studies further. So I decided first to study nutritional science in a way to start working with people with eating disorders. And when I was studying that, which is, really extensive and, very stressful and wonderful studies, I realized then that I still didn't have the scope of practice that I wanted and needed to treat eating disorders, because so much of the behavior that comes from eating disorder comes from, long-standing beliefs about yourself, or, the kind of environment you grew up in, or the relationship you have to your parents. And so I really wanted to take it all the way. And that's when I went to study clinical psychology and get my PsyD in health psychology. And so with all of that, that's when I really felt like I had everything that I needed to be able to treat somebody, not only suffering from eating disorders, but really from anything. Because when you look at mental health, it's all related. It's physical health, it's emotional health, it's mental health, and treating somebody on all those levels can really improve them, in a holistic way.
What an incredible, inspiring journey that you've been on ever since, I guess, the inception of your close friend and that inspiration and idea. I mean, not a good place for that person to be in. And for you on the other side, witnessing, that's journey for them as well. It's inspiring that you've been able to really follow that inner guidance, or whatever you call it, to really gain the knowledge and tools that you needed to be able to treat. In saying so, I would love to test, we rewind it back to this friend. And obviously, we won't go into like confidentiality reasons. We're not going to go into the details. However, I would really like to know from your side of things, what were the kind of things that would classify an eating disorder? Or in your personal experience, what did that look like, sound like, feel like, as that person on the sideline, to be seeing, how did you know that, like, that was a problem that they were going through? You can't hear me. Oh. Something. I can't hear you now either. Oh no.
Yes. So my friend, I would see basically, what I kind of determined it was that she was suffering from was bulimia nervosa. And what I would see in my friend would be some really extreme binging behaviors. I would see her just basically kind of mindlessly shovel in food, just, copious amounts, where I was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot. And just kind of almost like just eating on autopilot and for and then I would see her not eating at all for at least a day or two after that. So, I'm not sure at that time if that like really fully classified as bulimia. And I don't think that she was doing other kind of compensatory behaviors like throwing up, but I don't know that. I mean, she could have been doing that in, private. But what I would see would be this extreme binging and then this extreme, compensatory type behavior of just not eating for days. And it was really disturbing. Plus, you'd feel like, just this really general low, depressed mood. And just she had changed just,
So what I would see was, some really disturbing eating behaviors. Basically, I would see her just binging and binging and binging. This could be for hours, just, sort of mindlessly just shoveling in food for a good amount of time, where you would just really notice and say that's, far more than anybody should eat in a small amount of time. And then I would see her not eating for days and days after that. So that's, what I pretty much deduced, that it was bulimia nervosa, which is basically categorized by, binging unusual amounts of food, and then having some kind of compensatory behavior. Oftentimes that's, vomiting or laxative use, or the use of diuretics, or starvation kind of measures to compensate for the binge. So that's, essentially, what my adolescent self kind of figured out, but I didn't know how to approach it. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know what to say, and it seemed like anything that I would say would kind of fall flat and would not be heard. So it was really distressing to see that. And thankfully, she eventually got help. But it was really kind of a major introduction into how disturbing these eating disorders can be and how distressing they are.
Yeah. And I guess from your point of view as well, I think it'd be interesting and insightful for the audience. I guess in hindsight, knowing what you know now, how could someone on the sideline, a witness, a friend, a family member, if someone was seeing this was happening, this kind of behavior was happening within someone that they care about, how is it best to approach this kind of situation or open up the dialogue about this so that, you know, because some people, I would imagine that people in this situation, the victim themselves, may not recognize it, or are they doing it intentionally? There's so many factors around the behavior side of things, but some people might not seek help as well. So it can continue for a very long time. So I'm wondering, I guess, in order to support someone through this, what kind of advice or approach could someone take if they were witnessing this behavior?
Well, I think if I were to go back in time, I would really want to just open up conversation about what's happening in the person's life, as opposed to really honing in on the behavior. I think that's the mistake I made when I was young. I was, really honed in and like, what are you doing? Why are you eating like this? What is going on with you? In a way that it made so much of a defensive reaction that I was pushed away. And I can see myself compassionately at that time, but I can also see why, it kind of fell on deaf ears and was, pushed away. So I think being there to be as an emotional support first is probably the most important thing that you can do. Asking that person, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? Is there anything that's bothering you? And trying to just be a listening ear can be the first step. And then I think because eating disorders themselves are so, complex and difficult to treat, it's not something that I think, just anyone can speak to. So really encouraging that person to talk to a professional, someone who's trained in this, someone who can really, help guide them toward recovery and healing. And I think couching it in those terms is very helpful to somebody who's suffering from this, because it really is about seeking recovery and seeking healing. So when you can use that terminology, I think it's embraced a little bit more than you have a problem and you need to go get it fixed. It's, you're experiencing a lot of issues in life, and somebody who is, trained in this can really help navigate the way through this so that you end up on the better side of health at the end of that.
Yeah, that is really beneficial for people to know. And one of the things that I've learned along my journey as well is that people are not their behaviors. So it's really, everything that you were saying in terms of taking a step back and really finding out like what is actually causing the behavior, because there could be so many factors. And that behavior can just, one is that it manifests in an eating disorder or the binging and that kind of behavior. It could be many other types of behaviors too. But that is just one way that someone expresses, something that they're going through in their experience. So really, really valid. I want to go into what you mentioned earlier about fitness and how like you saw when you started going into the field, that a lot of people were experiencing, whether we call it disorders or just kind of, certain problems with their image, self-image, and their health, nutrition, wellness, all of that. Speak to us about, what's that culture like? Like, why do you think, or when during your experience, that people were striving and, doing these kind of behaviors, or just, for the look and the aesthetics and all of this stuff? Like, give us a bit more insight into what that world was like.
Well, I've done a lot of research in this area, and, it's really important for me to understand why these kinds of disorders develop. And that's a very, very complex question. You can really look at it from all different sides. You can look at it externally and internally. If we were to look at it externally, I think that there are two major biases that come into play that are at the root of, these problems with our image. And one is lookism, which is basically a preferential treatment for people who are considered better looking than others. And there's also weightism. So weightism, or, a lot of people, that there's a bunch of different types of terminology for that, like fat phobia and things like that. But weightism is kind of, in my opinion, a little bit more of like a technical term, is bias against people who are considered to be overweight or obese. And those two competing biases, I think, are at the root of diet culture. And diet culture in and of itself is, I think, an industry driven kind of culture that promotes thinness, weight loss, dieting, image, enhancement, and things like that. So it's an entire industry based on this fear of being, discriminated against, if you are overweight, and this desire to achieve this unachievable ideal. When you look at that in Los Angeles, that's like the mecca, the epicenter of this. When you see how, people's images and things like this are doctored and changed and altered to look, even more like desirable or thinner than they actually are in real life, you really understand that this affects everybody, from the influencer, celebrity, all the way to the person who's experiencing weightism. So it's a very complex and very insidious culture that I think is just worldwide at this point. I think it's really just about how can you achieve this ideal, and it really is, how do we achieve this at any cost? And I mean that cost, like, to your physical health and your mental health, but also to your wallet. That's where you see the proliferation of all of these, plastic surgery, treatments and things like that, and Botox and the whole deal, and, every diet known to mankind. So for me as a clinician, I want to make sure that I'm educating people about this and showing them, just historically, this hasn't always been the case. It actually, before the Victorian age, it was in to be fat. Like, it was desirable to have excess weight because it showed that you had enough money for food. So it's all variable. In 100 years, we could have something completely different or even worse than we have right now. So I really want to have people, basically deprogram themselves out of diet culture and really learn how to tune into themselves, listen to themselves, and find value in their own uniqueness.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And you mentioned about this whole idea of achievement, because there is an ideal self, right? Like, when that image comes into our minds, like, we would do whatever it takes, like some people, to the extreme, to achieve that ideal self. And sometimes, like you said, it's unattainable. Even for me, I'll share a little bit in terms of, I was in the fitness world, and I did participate in bodybuilding competitions so I was pretty much on the diets, and I was in the culture, and I was starving myself for a while because, it's part of the regime, but I wanted to do it for research. I wanted to know what it felt like. But I remember one little moment in the bathroom when, before the showtime, there were women in the bathroom saying like, oh, I haven't eaten for 3 days. And it's a brag fest. And I was just like, and I was like, oh my God, like, like I knew, I hadn't either, but then I was like, I wasn't talking about it because I knew, like, I felt inside it wasn't healthy and this was something I couldn't sustain. But it can become an addiction in that sense as well, where, the looks really take over and the weight take over, I guess, the inner well-being as well.
Right.
So that when you talk about deprogramming, because when someone is in the culture, like, you know, where you said in the mecca of things, what are some of the steps, or what are some of the ways that people can start to recognize and deprogram themselves out of it?
Well, this is actually a course that I'm creating right now. I think it's really important that it starts with awareness. I think that, you know, being a mindfulness practitioner, mindfulness in and of itself is awareness. It's a focused, open-hearted awareness of the present moment. So starting to just be aware of these influences in and of themselves is the first step. You look at your social media feed, you look at any advertisement, you open any magazine, and you'll see that it's inundated with diet culture. So what do you do with that? How can you possibly, if it's everywhere, it's insidious, it's in every movie, it's in every TV show, it's everywhere. How? How do you get out of it? Well, first is by being aware of it and seeing it for what it is, and understanding that this influence is primarily driven by consumerism. So it's about you being made to feel less than. So that awareness in and of itself can help you start to reject it. And how you reject it is up to you. I really recommend people look at their social media feed and completely do an overhaul. Anyone and anything, any advertisement that makes them feel less than, I invite them to reject that, hide it, unfollow, just stop. Don't look at those things, and really start to like reprogram your social media feed in particular with things that make you feel good, or people that are always promoting something that makes you interested, that brings you intellectual curiosity, that you can look at in terms of beauty in nature and things like that, so that you're really taking and curating what's coming at you. I think it's really important to do that with your news feed as well, what you're consuming in terms of news, but also advertisements. You can easily, in the time of DERs and controllers, scroll past any advertisement, skip past them or mute it, stop any kind of subscriptions to fashion magazines and lifestyle magazines, or at the very least, if you're going to look at those with awareness that they're designed. They are absolutely designed to make you buy whatever is being advertised in that magazine. So having that awareness and having a secondary focus, I think, is the first step. But I think it takes a lot more than just that. That's kind of the starting point. Really, it's also about, where did you develop these ideas in the first place? So I invite people to look back into their childhood. When did they start to have disordered eating patterns, or how did they eat before then? What were they like when they were 6 years old and they didn't have these influences? And then I'd like them to examine when they started to come into their lives and how that changed their thinking. Because once you really, kind of dissect that and learn where you develop these thoughts about yourself, that's when you can actively change them. You can change them on your own, and you can change them with a therapist, or you can do a combination of the two. But I think it's really important to examine these thoughts and to create new, healthier, and more self-compassionate thoughts for yourself. And about food, we are, number one at vilifying foods. It really bothers me when everybody says, "Oh, you got to cut the carbs." I'm like, we absolutely 100% need carbs to live, to think, for our brains to function. So I like people to actually also look at their long-standing beliefs about food. I like to challenge them and help them make new thoughts. And then, how do you make all of that, kind of last for your lifetime? That's when you really have to look at, sustainable behavior change. So I work with people on how they can really make these new thoughts into habits, how they can make mindful eating into a habit? How can they, stop mindless eating and emotional eating and make mindful eating a habit?
Mm,
So it's a complex process, but I
yeah.
really do think it starts from just having awareness alone.
Yeah, it's such everything that you were saying is really like an onion. There's so many
Mhm,
layers.
mhm,
And I really see it from what you were saying as a process of it. There's mainly four states. There's spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, right? But
right.
but in the sense of the culture side of things, um, it really starts at the physical level is where
Mhm,
you are bombarded by all the media and all of the things outside of yourself and the fitness and all the things that you do in life.
mhm.
But then it's really like peeling that layer back and really
Yeah.
examining, where does it come from, the emotions
Mhm,
on the mental level, because that all that is, it can be subconscious. So it's
right.
really peeling that back and really going back to the beginning or the start, and then
Mhm,
really growing the onion back out again and really starting from the
exactly.
mindfulness of, all the things, building the habits, to really rebuilding what does it look like on a physical level. How does the behavior
Mhm,
actually change as well because of
mhm,
the way that we rewire
mhm.
the inner programming, the inner beliefs and emotions and all of that. So
Right.
that is just so powerful, from what you've said. So really, really great.
And just like you said,
Yeah.
we're not our behaviors. I always tell people we're not our thoughts. We may have been thinking these thoughts for ever and ever and ever and ever, but that doesn't mean that that's what we always used to think. And that doesn't mean that that's who we are. And just as, it's maybe simple, not easy, but as simple as it is to change your thoughts, is completely possible. You just have to learn how to practice these new thoughts. You have been thinking these other thoughts for forever so that they become automatic. You have to practice the new thinking until that becomes automatic. But
Mm.
it's absolutely possible. And when I see that happening and when I see the change that comes to my clients from that, it's just absolutely inspiring.
Yeah, sure is. When so perfect that, I mean, like, yeah, that work is really important, especially in the area that you are in as well, where
Mhm.
that is very, that culture exists.
Mhm.
I want to go now into, the side of your work. What has been, I guess, massively transforming for yourself and keeps you doing what you do now?
Oh, I just think it's just being with my clients. I really knew that was in my calling the minute I started to work with clients. And, if anything is a mindfulness activity, it's working one on one with a client and
Mm,
being there for their journey and just witnessing what they're experiencing and feeling what they're feeling and taking that journey with them and then seeing them come out on the other side of health is the most fulfilling thing. I can't even express how joyful it makes me feel. And
mm,
a lot of people are like, well, how can you do this? You're listening to all these problems day in and day out. And to me, it's about, guiding and helping and being an empathetic, compassionate ear for someone. So I never feel like I take, whatever's coming at me inside and incorporating it inside of me. I feel like I'm, emanating and helping to create this, different mindset. So when you see
mm,
that happening, it's just an amazing, beautiful process.
mm. Yeah, I totally resonate with that. For
Mhm.
yourself personally, how do what are the things that you would do, in order to stay compassionate, in order to not absorb and take in all the things? You'd have to build up
Mhm.
your own armor in some way, or
Mhm.
talk us through what's your process like, for your, do you have a routine, or like
I do.
how do you do the things so that you can keep showing up in your best way?
In a way, I've become almost like regimented or even like militant in self-care. Like I am very much, I have a very specific routine that I, especially on the days that I'm seeing clients, because sometimes I'll go like 8 hours straight even to see, all of my clients. So how do you manage that? How does your body take that? So I wake up, I drink a ton of water, I make sure that I exercise. I'll exercise for at least 30 minutes before I start my day. And that alone is so important to me. Just sitting in a chair all day is so hard on your body. So I just make sure that I'm moving, and I have this like little mini trampoline, and I just bounce like crazy on it so that I get all my energy out, and I work my muscles. Then I'm very, very conscious about, what I'm eating, and make sure that I'm eating, something that's going to sustain me and give me energy and help me, to be able to think and process and be there mentally and emotionally for people. And before I even start my day, I'll usually meditate. I meditate, and I tend to do that and think about the clients that I'm about to see. And I let whatever intuition come to me. And usually it's really weird. Like if I'm really attuned, I'll, have thought about my client beforehand, and then they come in with what I'm thinking about, which is just really kind of
Wow.
really wild, and just
Mm.
makes me know that we're all really spiritually connected.
Mhm.
And then I also have a massage chair. So I like sit in my massage chair for like a half an hour before I start my day. So my body is completely and totally ready to be receptive.
Mm.
Afterwards, I close everything off. I try not to, take anything with me. Even if I'm working at home, I make sure that it stays in this room, and that I'm not doing any work, um, for my practice after I'm done seeing clients. I just shut everything down and just
Mm.
let myself decompress and just be a regular human again.
Yeah. This is a really great regiment that people can do themselves as well, having the boundaries of your morning and then after work as well.
Mhm.
Give us some insight, because there's all this talk about morning routines and all of these things, and
Mhm.
it's different for everyone. You
Mhm.
personally, how long does your whole routine take in the morning?
Well, I think if I were to really, it depends. I usually make sure that I'll have at least 3 hours before I start seeing clients. So I
Mm,
have this, no talking before 11 a.m. policy.
that's great.
And I just want to make sure that I, give myself time. I'll go later in the evening. I have no problem with that. But it's usually quite a long process. If I don't have that much time, it would usually take me at least to do exercise, meditation, and my massage at least 2 hours. I
Hmm.
think is really important. So yes, I wake up early, I make sure that I get all of that in. Plus I have to do things like I'm a dog mom and feed and walk my dogs and things like that. So I just want
Hmm.
to make sure that I have plenty of time for that I don't feel rushed. But just if you were doing this on kind of your average day, I really think it's important to start out small. If you are wanting to incorporate this, 15 minutes, 10 minutes of meditation, or even 5 minutes of meditation does so much good for you.
Mm.
15 minutes of exercise certainly is better than zero. I try
Hmm.
to get 30 minutes in, or 45 if I'm, really, on a roll. But it really is about what is doable for you. And the smaller, the better, in
Yeah.
terms of kind of creating a new habit.
Hmm.
So, mindful eating doesn't have to be like this whole, 2 hour process, or it's like, a meal that you would see in France. It can be as little as 20 minutes of just focusing on your food and being with your food and enjoying that. That's, I think,
Mm.
doable for pretty much anybody if
Yeah.
they, were to carve out and make that time. So
Yeah.
I think the smaller the better. And then, anchor, you using like an anchor behavior is really important. If you want to create a new habit, say you
Hmm.
do want to start meditation, it can be the minute you wake up at the same time every day, you can just attach that behavior to the behavior of waking up. I'm going to wake up. I'm lying in bed already. 10 minutes. I'm just going to lie here and I'm going to meditate. However, whatever works for you. Drink a glass of water every morning, exercise right after. Whatever you can do to kind of anchor, or to attach your behavior to an anchor behavior, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful because I could see that maybe these days with technology, people just reach for their phones in the morning. It's tempting, right? And that could be just a replacement of when you wake up, it could just be something else. But the starting small is really key, just to get things as well. Otherwise, I think if you are too ambitious to, from 0 to 100, it's easy to fall off the bandwagon and then just be like, this is not working, but it could be if you gave it a chance.
And if you look at all of kind of your habits that you have right now, they started somewhere and they usually started small. Like you're not brushing your teeth for 3 hours. You're brushing your teeth for, 2-3 minutes. And how can you add on behaviors that last, like brushing your teeth? I think it's making them small and then always having that as a baseline. If you want to do anything more, great. But if you're having a really bad day, a really bad morning, and you don't have a lot of time, going back to that tiny little behavior is going to be a lot more simple, a lot easier than if you were, making this, I have to do, an hour of meditation every day.
Lastly, as well, on one thing you were mentioning there, the compassion, the self-compassion. What happens is that it's easy when something's not working, or if for one day we didn't fit in the 10 minutes or, get into our routine. What's something that you would say to yourself, or how could you be more compassionate towards, okay, I didn't tick this off today, but, let's get back on it tomorrow?
I think it's really important to have kind of just a series of mantras. Basically, if you are trying to change your thinking about yourself, how can you do that in a meditative way? So I like to give my clients or have them make up their own mantras. Like for somebody who is recovering from eating disorders, one really powerful mantra is I'm healing. If there's a person who's suffered from trauma and they, are constantly thinking that the world is, this unsafe place and that people are out to get them, to realize that in the moment they're safe. They can repeat over and over to themselves, I am safe. So, anything that helps you to, look at yourself with an eye of compassion, I think is really helpful. I'm doing my best. I'll do it again tomorrow. Today I need rest. Anything that you can say to yourself that allows you to just be, that doesn't force you to be anything other than, who you are and to be where you're at in that moment. And then, to provide yourself encouragement. Really, when you look at how people think about themselves, they're their own worst enemies. I mean, if you really pull out the thoughts that a lot of people think about themselves, you'd be like, wow, that is incredibly hateful. So, reversing that language takes time. And I think compassion is the key, looking at yourself almost kind of in a metacognitive way, outside of yourself and saying, what would I say to somebody who is, experiencing this right now? You wouldn't say, hey, jerk, get out of bed. It's okay.
Easy to beat you because your inner critic, can be very loud. And and some of the things you say to yourself, you would never say to someone else. So really just switching up the position of that is really key. Supatra, we could go on for hours. I know there is so much more, and maybe we could have another conversation again another day later down the track. But for now, I would like to ask you a last couple of questions. And that is, the first one is, at this stage of your life right now, what does fulfillment mean to you?
I think I have it. To be honest, I think for me, fulfillment is helping people. And the moment that I started doing that, and that was when I was, starting out in fitness, I really felt fulfilled after every encounter with somebody. And the more education I got and the more ability that I, got to be able to help people, the more fulfilled my life is. Everything else that I'm doing, the course I'm creating or anything else that I'm writing, that's on top. That's in addition. Right now, I feel like I have, really found my calling, and I'm fulfilled and I'm happy and I'm doing what I love. That's, to me, the ultimate in fulfillment.
Amazing. And lastly, after you have helped millions and billions of people across this world, and you've really maxed out your inner calling and done the work that you were made to do here on earth, it becomes your last day on earth. What would be the message that you would want to send to anyone out there or leave us with?
It makes me tear up a little. I think that the only thing that matters in life is love. That's it. And I really do think that most choices, there's a great Jim Carrey commencement speech out there where he basically says that, everything in life comes down to two choices. You can either choose love or you can choose fear. If you choose love, you can never go wrong. And so if you live your life just looking at the choices that you can make and do everything that you can to choose love, you're going to have a happy and fulfilled life. There is no other way toward that other than choosing love.
So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights and wisdom today, Supatra. It's been a great time.
Ditto. And I would love to come back and have another conversation at some point. You're a wonderful host.
You're welcome.